What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with more players that we are fading, more players to let your league mates draft in the middle rounds this time. The other day, we talked about guys that we're letting our league mates drafts from round 1 to 3. Today, we're going to be talking about rounds 4 to 6. As always, you can check out the other videos that we did this week. We talked about guys that were smashing rounds 1 to 3, guys that we are smashing rounds 4 to 6. But today, we are talking about guys that we are fading in rounds 4 to 6. A lot of dead zone running backs coming up, so be prepared. This area of the draft, like we talked about in yesterday's video, is where, fantasy championships are make or break type of situations, because a lot of people can, pick the right guys in the early rounds. But once we get into the more questionable profiles is when people start to fall apart in their draft. So as always, if you feel like you got some value from this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you're new around here, we are trying to get to 13K as quick as we can. We're, in the big time growth period for us here at Fantasy Stock Exchange. So if you've got some value from our videos and you haven't subscribed yet, we really appreciate you doing so. And leave any comments down below. We're happy to engage with you there. But Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. There's another side of the coin. And with some of these players, it just doesn't seem alluring in terms of their actual range of outcomes towards what we want to allocate in these mid rounds, where, as we see, the Jamar Chases, the Cooper Kupps, the league winning players emerge from every single year. You want to be able to get access to some of those players, get access to some of those profiles. And the guys that we're going to be talking about today, none of them really represent that type of profile to fully ascend, to fully become one of those league winners on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's interesting about this video too is we have a little bit more disagreement in this video than we do typically, because normally we're on, par with most of our takes, but some of the guys that you have as fades, some of the guys that I have as fades, we're not necessarily in lockstep on. So for those of you guys that think we always agree on everything, we'll definitely have some disagreement here. But without further ado, let's get into it. Let's hit the intro. Okay, so let's start off with round 4. You guys can see the ADP on the screen there. In yesterday's video, we talked about some of the biggest values: Akers, ETN, Deontay Johnson. Today, who do you got for us, Danny, as one of your biggest fades in this round? And this is one of the ones that we disagree on, by the way.
Honestly, I mean, I'm not even really fading this guy because I do have him 51. His ADP is at 44, but I have Mike Williams listed here. Again, this round as a whole is pretty decently priced for the most part. I mean, a lot of these guys I'm pretty much in agreement with being at their placement, but with Mike Williams, again, there's no real fade. However, I am a bit lower due to the usage that we saw from him down the stretch. So we know last year, start of the year, Mike Williams looked like he could be that league winning player for the Los Angeles Chargers in those first 4 or 5 weeks or so. But that was more so when he had access to the intermediate portion of the field, when he was used more as a target magnet type of receiver. We did see down the stretch, he was kind of pigeonholed back into that classic Mike Williams 20, 30-yard bomb deep roll, which is going to give him access to some big plays, but is more so going to make him a more volatile asset on a week-to-week basis. For whatever reason, again, despite that dominance he showed early in the season, they did revert that, roll back week 6 and on. And his target share and his output were severely impacted down the stretch. You guys can see on the screen, but I talked about this in my contextualized game log series, but down the stretch, week 7 on, after the bye week for the Chargers, Keenan Allen was just thoroughly dominant in terms of being that clear-cut Chargers wide receiver 1. Mike Williams in that stretch only commanded about an 18% target share on 12.6 PPR points per game, which across a full season would have been the wide receiver 31. He is currently on most platforms being valued as a top 20 to 25 overall. He's the wide receiver 17 on ADP. If he was more so like the wide receiver 25, wide receiver 24, I would be more fine with buying him here. But again, if he's only going to be this volatile deep threat, if he's only going to get those 20, 30-yard high ADOT targets, then I have severe concerns about his target potential against guys like, as we would have talked about on last video, Allen Robinson in this range, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, even like DK Metcalf, Deontay Johnson. I think Mike Williams just presents a lot more volatility. Again, could he prove me wrong? Could he revert back to the Mike Williams we saw in those first few games? Sure, but if we're getting Mike Williams usage that we saw down the stretch last year, his wide receiver 17 ADP is just way too high for me.
Right. And I think the reason you're more willing to buy into that usage is because we have like a 5-year sample size of Mike
Correct.
Williams being used that way and like a 6-game sample size of him being used in the way where he was paying off big time at ADP. So he was one of the guys I talked about as like a sell high last year during the trade targets videos. Hopefully you did, because you probably could have parlayed him into pretty much any receiver you wanted based on the start that he had to the season last year. A lot of people were very high on him. He proved to be a great pick in like the mid to late rounds. But this year, you're not getting that discount anymore. You got to draft him on underdog specifically. You got to draft him in like the third round. Multi-site, it's more so like mid fourth or so. But I'm cool with him towards like the back end of the fourth round. But for the most part, I'm similar to you that I think he might be a little overinflated. People think that Keenan Allen. I've heard people say Keenan Allen's washed and he's like
Saw
declining
that.
as a player. Matt Harmon reception perception didn't indicate anything about Keenan Allen's game being over the hill or washed in any regard. So I'm still going to treat Keenan Allen as a number one wide receiver there. It's possible Mike Williams has, high touchdown upside in this offense. We know Austin Eckler could be due for some touchdown regression that could benefit Mike Williams. So there's definitely a range of outcomes where he pays off at this ADP, but I think the risk factor is a little bit stronger than people maybe want to admit with Mike Williams. So we can move on to the next guy, which is David Montgomery, who I have ranked vastly lower than where he's going on here. He has a 39 overall ADP. My rank of him is 72. So I would not touch this guy until the 6th round, 7th round. The draw of David Montgomery in years past has always been volume. He led in the NFL in opportunity share in 2020 with a 90% opportunity share. We're talking like Najee Harris type of workload. 80% opportunity share last year, which still ranked 4th, and he was 2nd in the NFL at running back in overall snap share of his offense. The issue with why I don't think that's going to continue is a few things. For starters, despite a huge workload last year, he wasn't all that productive. He was RB12 in points per game. He was giving you more so replacement level production than, great production that we saw towards the back half of 2020 when he had that easy schedule. This offense ranked 27th in points per game last year. And to be honest, I don't expect them to be much better, if even worse, this year with Justin Fields not having a ton of guys to throw to. The offensive line still kind of in shambles as well. We also have factors now affecting his big time safe workload that we had in the past. Number one, Khalil Herbert has had the Bears drumbeat beating all training camp about Khalil Herbert getting a bigger share of this backfield. The scores, Chris Emma talked about it. A couple athletic reporters have reported it as well. So we have another major threat as well with the new coaching staff coming in who has no allegiance to David Montgomery getting some huge workload like we saw with Matt Nagy in years past. And most coaches, we have to assume, would rather use a 2-back system if they have 2 talented running backs than use a workhorse running back. So I think Khalil Herbert is going to creep in on some of the receiving work, some of the touches, some of the goal line work, as limited as that might be in a bad offense. So we have a potential committee running back in a bottom 5 offense that's a solid player, but is not an elite, going to work on efficiency type of RB1 like a Nick Chubb, for example. So to me, I don't see a huge difference, honestly, between David Montgomery and either of the Patriots running backs, because I think both of those guys are going to have maybe a little bit less work than David Montgomery, but they're going to be in a much better offense with much more goal line potential. And I think David Montgomery will be capped from a receiving perspective. So to me, there's just red flags all over the board with David Montgomery. Prototypical dead zone running back, and I'm not touching him at this price.
Yeah, there's going to be a few of those in this video, FYI, but I agree with you with David Montgomery. I mentioned for the most part, this round is well priced. Well, David Montgomery was the clear outlier on that in both of our rankings. I said, you have him, 72nd overall? I have him in my mid to late 60s. So with David Montgomery, you're just drafting him. I mentioned in last video, you don't want to just draft a running back to fill out your RB2. This is that prototypical, I need an RB2. Who am I going to look at? Well, David Montgomery got, this amount of work last year. Let's try to project that onto next year, because ultimately here I need a running back. And the problem with that, as we see on a year-to-year basis, is the level of production, that value that David Montgomery actually adds to your lineup comparative to opportunity cost is far too inflated, because we do see, your Elijah Mitchells, your Darrell Williams, guys like that, or James Connors, guys like that will just emerge in the late rounds or on waivers on a year-to-year basis, to the point where prioritizing your RB2 solely based on volume rather than upside is going to land you in a spot where whoever league mate gets that free Elijah Mitchell with their fab, or gets that 10th round James Conner instead of your 4th round, 5th round David Montgomery, they're going to get access to more upside at much better opportunity cost. And I mean, the advance rates, the hit rates will all indicate to the fact that for the most part, rounds 9 to 13 round selected running backs actually usually hit more than dead zone running backs because they are propped up on talent. They are propped up on upside, whereas the dead zone running backs, as I said, are propped up on supposed opportunity going into the season.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine if you get your RB2 that gives you 14 points per game in round 12, but it's not fine if you get him in round 3 because that's going to hurt you big time. And that's where David Montgomery's going. So, not a guy that I'm going to have any shares of. I think I've maybe drafted him like once on underdog if he falls to like round 5, round 6. And on that site, the field is a lot sharper, and usually he does fall a lot further than round 3. But in home leagues, people are going to want to fill out that RB2 slot. They're going to grab David Montgomery. He's got good volume. He's been good in years past. And they're just going to, go with the set it and forget it RB2, which is never something that you want to do. So an honorable mention in this round, like you said, this round was reasonably priced for the most part, but this is one player that I think is going, and there's a big dichotomy where he's going on underdog versus where he's going in multi-site. George Kittle, I have ranked at 50 overall, which is about where he goes on underdog, but he's going at 38 on home league ADP, which is what we're using, multi-site ADP from 444. George Kittle is a great player, right? I think he's the best tight end in the league, but this doesn't shock me at all that he's going higher in home league ADP than he is on underdog, because most people who are drafting on underdog are taking into account projection and some of the concerns that we have with George Kittle, because he is not without blemishes. As good as this dude is, the too many mouths to feed believers are big advocates of fading George Kittle this year. And you guys won't hear us talk about too many mouths to feed type of pieces too often because we generally think it's an overplayed narrative. But for San Francisco, when the pie is this small, it does have some validity. This team ranked 29th in total pass attempts last year with a pocket passing quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo. Now they have Trey Lance, who is in his first full year as a starter. He's primarily a mobile quarterback. We don't know how much this team is going to throw the ball. I think if Trey Lance turns into like a, Patrick Mahomes his second year, obviously they're probably going to throw more than we think. But I think it's more likely that we get a Jalen Hurts level rookie season or first year starting out of Trey Lance. And this is more of a run heavy offense. Plus we have Deebo Samuel, who was a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy last year. And we have Brandon Ayuk, who's another guy that's getting the drum beat of training camp all offseason as well. I'd personally just rather take Darren Waller a little bit later in the draft. And I sure as hell can't take George Kittle over some of the guys that we talked about yesterday, ETN, Akers, Deontay Johnson, even some of the receivers going after that, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, Hollywood Brown, Allen Robinson. I would rather take those guys. And then once that, little wide receiver dead zone hits, then I'm cool taking George Kittle. But for the most part in home leagues, I won't get him in that mid 4th round area, late 4th round area where that happens.
And this is kind of where we disagree a little bit. I understand too the target dichotomy in San Francisco, given the fact that this is going to be a lower passing volume team, and the weapons, of course, on that team. I understand the too many mouths to feed narrative in this respect, but with George Kittle, I mean, this is more so a philosophical thing between my rankings and yours, that I have those earlier tight ends propped up even higher because I have those mid to late tight ends a little bit lower, and we'll get into that later in the video, but basically, I would rather just pay up for, a top 5 tight end like a Kittle, Waller, etc., or the guys above them, or I'd rather just wait until I get the best opportunity cost at the position, because I do think the advantage that they give you at the position, especially those elite guys, are worth more relative to that mid tier. So that's just more so a philosophical thing. I understand, from a point or from a pure point potential standpoint. Yeah, I mean, A-Rob, you mentioned DK Metcalf, Deontay Johnson. Some of those receivers are very, very appealing, but I would rather just, forfeit some of that because I know George Kittle at his ceiling can give me 14 PPR points per game, whereas I don't necessarily see that from any of those mid to late tight ends, which maybe you do. Maybe you do spot, your Goddard, your Hockenson, your Schultz as being able to get up to that range, but I just don't necessarily view that tier on the same wavelength. So that's why I'm more willing to pay 4th, 5th round for Kittle, because I know, okay, well, now I can just fill out my wide receiver core and I got that elite advantage.
Yeah, and if people checked out the who's the next league winning tight end video, you guys know that I am higher on the middle tier of tight ends than I am on the top 5 guys. Outside of Darren Waller, I think the other guys are being priced closer to their ceilings, which is something I don't usually like saying about players, but for the most part, I think it's true for the tight end position. So we can move on to the round 5 area of ADP, and this one has a lot more guys mispriced than the round 4 area of ADP, and you can take it away with pretty much the guy that has gotten his ass kicked as far as his ADP this entire summer. Everybody's bust list has Antonio Gibson on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just pretty simple to me. Obviously, again, this was one of my pet cats last year. If you guys were watching us last year, I was all in on Antonio Gibson. We were all in on Antonio Gibson, but yeah, I mean, it just sucks that now we're looking at another dead running back being taken way too high, in my opinion. I was as high as you possibly could have been, but that was on the premise that he would develop into this bell cow full workload that all offseason we were hearing from Washington camp. All offseason we were hoping Antonio Gibson, given his big playability, given his receiving prowess at Memphis, could develop into. But we saw last year he made next to no progress in the mental part of playing the running back position. He simply just tried to out athlete everyone when playing it rather than trying to learn his proper cutbacks, learn about his ball security, play the running back position instinctively. He wasn't playing instinctively. He was playing, oh, well, I don't see the hole, so I'm just going to bounce this outside and try to muscle my way through or outrun my way through 2 yardage. And we've seen the Washington staff kind of just get sick of that. I mean, they used every indicator this offseason has shown that the Washington staff wants to at least make this a committee, especially with the preference recently we've seen in the offseason in the first preseason game of using Brian Robinson in those high leverage situations, specifically those third down situations, those goal line situations, those short yardage situations. Brian Robinson has been the trusted running back out of this backfield. And you guys could see a pick on the screen about a recent report from the Commanders, but it's basically just saying that the coaches say with Gibson, he gets himself in way too much trouble based off his indecisiveness. And man, it sucks because of how good athletically he is, how talented he is as a pure athlete. But the running back position is a lot more nuance based than people want to recognize. And if he doesn't have those instincts, they're going to put a running back on the field who does. So even if Robinson doesn't end up being the full RB1 for the Washington Commanders, again, the coaches are going to lessen the load of Antonio Gibson. If he does not earn the trust of these coaches, that's going to impact his ceiling. And as you guys know from watching this channel, we're not drafting a running back based off a limited ceiling. Oh, he's probably going to finish, between RB12 and RB25 in points per game. So it's a safe pick. If Antonio Gibson doesn't have top 5 to 8 running back, even higher in his range of outcomes, just take a wide receiver. So ultimately, I have Gibson as my 83rd ranked player. If he falls at, crazy value about where I have him, I'm fine with taking and mixing in some shares of him. But if he's going this high, we're talking about the 5th round, where, as I've said in the prelude to this video, elite league winning wide receivers emerge from every year. I talked about Jerry Jeudy on last episode, Chris Godwin if he's healthy, maybe Cortland Sutton. Like, there's a lot of receivers in this range specifically that are just much better investments given their upside outcome than Antonio Gibson. So I am fading him. 51 just doesn't really make sense for a limited running back. As high as I was on him last year, now that I have this information, I can adapt to the process.
Right. And that's the key thing right there is because I've seen a lot of people say, like, there were so many people high on Antonio Gibson. Now you guys are just giving up after he had another, 10 plus touchdown season and all that kind of stuff. The mental side of the game is the part that was the problem for him. Clearly, he didn't play the position in college and it hasn't progressed. And unfortunately, it might be a what if scenario where we got this 6 foot, 230-pound running back who runs a 4.3 who never figured it out from a mental side of things. And I think I also tweeted the thing out where I said all these 3 things can be true. Antonio Gibson's probably being used improperly. As athletic as he is, as good as he was as a receiver, he should not be being pounded up the middle 20 times a game. Number 2, that role should be reserved for Brian Robinson. And number 3, even though Gibson is not suited for that role, he's probably still a worse pass catcher and a worse pass protector than J.D. McKissic. So he's kind of in no man's land in this backfield. And if I was him, I would probably want to be traded. But for the most part, I don't think they're going to do that because they know you can never have too many running backs on your roster, and they probably want to have the depth, and they're not going to get, a second-round pick for Antonio Gibson or anything like that. So they're probably just going to hold him. So Antonio Gibson, just a lot of fire in the wrong direction about him, and I'm not down to draft him anywhere close to the 4th, 5th, 6th round. He is another prototypical dead zone running back, in my opinion. And speaking of a prototypical dead zone running back, we have Elijah Mitchell for the San Francisco 49ers. I have him ranked at 72nd or 73rd overall. 54 overall is where his ADP is. I feel like I shouldn't have to explain myself too much on why I don't like Elijah Mitchell. I think people in our audience, for the most part, will understand this. But if you guys are high on Elijah Mitchell, I would highly encourage you to rethink that stance because, number one, we have Elijah Mitchell, who is a late round pick in a Kyle Shanahan backfield. So he already doesn't have a lot of good job security. There's no money behind him. There's no high draft capital behind him. And in Kyle Shanahan's backfield, that matters even more because he will put random guys, and we saw it last year with Elijah Mitchell, 6th round pick, playing ahead of Trey Sermon, who was the 3rd round pick in that backfield. There's plenty of competition here. We have Jeff Wilson, who Shanahan's shown loyalty to. We have Trey Sermon, who was a 3rd round pick last year, who's looked a little bit better this year so far. And we have Tyrion Davis-Price, who they drafted in the 3rd round this year. So on top of all that, we have Elijah Mitchell, who is already injured, and injuries were a concern for him last year. Injuries, they've spoken about him not being trusted because of the injuries, and he's dealing with a hamstring injury that is going to keep him out throughout the entirety of the preseason. And when you have committee drum beats in your backfield all offseason, a starting running back in your backfield getting injured is only going to make the coaching staff want to go towards a committee more. It's not going to let them be like, okay, well, once Gibson or once Mitchell comes back, we're going to give him the full workload. No, if they were thinking about committee before, they're absolutely going to deploy a committee now. In fantasy drafts, it's much more cost effective to look for this year's Elijah Mitchell than to draft last year's Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, no, I agree with you with Elijah Mitchell. It's just exposing yourself to that much risk on a running back that doesn't reap as much a reward that makes it worth that risk. With Elijah Mitchell, even if he is everything that drafters hope he can be, he's probably what, the RB10? Like where
I
would
don't
you
even think he
say
can finish that high. I think he'd be
like
like RB 14, 15, because at the
the
bull
receiving
case, if he
work?
does get all the work and he is able to stay healthy, you still have a mobile quarterback that's going to take away goal line carries from him. You have an offense that, yeah, it's going to be run heavy, but no matter what, they're going to deploy a committee, and they're probably going to use a pass catching specialist instead of Elijah Mitchell. So you got like an early down grinder for an offense that might have him seat goal line carries to the quarterback. So either way, I think the ceiling case is that he like barely cracks 1,000 yards rushing and has like 7 touchdowns and like a few receptions here and there.
You know what's funny is I think like the ceiling case for Elijah Mitchell is probably what Antonio Gibson was last year. In the sense
Right, and
that
he was like RB 18 or RB 19 in points per game, which is about what I think Mitchell could be this year. And maybe, he was a first-year running back and he looked really good last year, so maybe I'm underselling his talent level a little bit. And I did love Elijah Mitchell coming out, but
yep.
there's just too much smoke around committee. I don't draft players that are already dealing with hamstring injuries in the preseason also, so that is definitely not something that is going in his favor either.
Yep, no, I would agree with you there. We'll get on to our honorable mentions, and this is one you mentioned with Mike Williams that you disagree with me. Well, I do disagree on this next player. You could take it away with Breece Hall, running back from the New York Jets.
Yeah, Breece Hall, I have him at 58. He's going at 49. It's not that I don't think Breece Hall has 3-down upside. It's not that I don't think he could be a league winner this year if he gets a full workload. But my reason for ranking him lower is that I simply think he's going to go to a slow start. And we saw it already in the first preseason game. Number one, his quarterback got injured, which definitely doesn't help the offense. And number two, Michael Carter outsnapped him 7-2 with the first team. So it doesn't matter whether you and I think Breece Hall is way better than Michael Carter, which I do. He is definitely the better talent, but I also still think Michael Carter can play, and the Jets coaching staff will probably ease in the rookie running back because that's usually what happens with second-round rookie running backs. It's not a Najee Harris situation where Breece Hall walks in and is the first-round top 20 draft capital running back. He gets all the work. It sounds like they had him ranked that way on their draft board, but they drafted him in the second round still. So I think he's going to get the second round running back treatment, which we saw from, Cam Akers. It took him a while his rookie year. J.K. Dobbins, it took him a while. DeAndre Swift, it took him a while. Last year, Javonte Williams never really regained the full workload. So with second round rookie running backs, they don't usually just give him a 75% opportunity share right off the bat. His talent dictates that he can handle that kind of workload. And maybe as the preseason goes along, we see him commanding more first team snaps. But for the most part, I think he's going to get out to a slow start. I'm just going to let my league mates draft Breece Hall, maybe trade low for him later, or just, be okay with missing out if he does maybe only take 2 games before he's back on, full workload kind of status.
That is the one caveat I have to my disagreement, if you will. If you're in a very reactive league, and a lot of home leagues are like that, where they're gonna think, a few weeks in, oh, I should have never trusted these analysts. Breece Hall, he's still a rookie running back. He's clearly seen the work. Like, this is not the guy that I tried to buy into. There's gonna be a rationale for a lot of your league mates to wanting to get out of Breece Hall, thinking that, oh, well, he's not going to get the full workload that I expected him to. If there's an opportunity you think in your league where you can buy him, week 4 or week 5 after a manager's fed up, and maybe you get, let's just say, like a Kareem Hunt or someone like that going later, and they're like the RB10 while Breece Hall is, getting some work, showing some flashes, but is only like the RB23 in points per game at the time. Maybe you can make that type of transition. And if you're in a league reactive enough to allow yourself to access that level of value, I'm fine with letting your other league mates draft him. But for the most part, if you're in a league that understands, okay, well, a rookie running back will take a few weeks, and they're going to value him based on that. They're not just going to sell him at a discount. I'm fine with just taking him where I'm ranked. So it all depends on where your league rank or where your league market is currently situated at and how reactive they are. If your league market is like mine, where they're not just overreactive in selling these guys, I'm more fine with taking Breece Hall earlier, living with those bumps, and ultimately expecting once he's able to fully seize the role, he still has that 19, 20 PPR point per game upside in the range of outcomes if this offense takes a step. But it all depends, again, on the reactivity of your league.
I think it depends on your league format also, because if you're in a league with 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, you can handle having your 5th round pick, maybe not be on the field right away. You could still draft a 6th round, 7th round wide receiver to fill out your flex for the time being. In my league, it's a 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, 2 flex, right? It's a deep format. So if you have a guy that's not giving you the potential of some of the wide receivers going around him right away, then that can hurt you early on in the season if other teams around you that you're playing against have deeper rosters than you. So the league format also kind of plays into factor for me why I have them a little bit lower.
We can move on to my fade, if you will. And it's going to come as a shock. You guys know I am a Dallas Cowboys fan, but this is more so just a process ranking as opposed to me not liking this player. Again, he is still my next rated tight end on my board, but I do have Dalton Schultz at 75. Current ADP, as you guys see, is 57. That's more so just procedural. Like I said, I would rather pay up for a guy like George Kittle, Darren Waller, or the tier above, or just punt until the last of the second tier. So whoever I can have a value between, Schultz, Hockenson, Goddard, et cetera, in that tier, I'm more so just willing to wait it out at that point. Even like Zach Ertz, more so just willing to wait it out at that point. Obviously, the projection of Dalton Schultz, if he's that number 2 weapon on Dallas, I think can absolutely pay off at his current tight end ranking. I just don't think there's enough of a discrepancy right now between his ADP and where George Kittle is going.
Yeah, see, I think it's the opposite. I think Schultz and Kittle are a lot closer than people think, at least the way I value them. Because when I did the tight end league winners video, you got an elite offense with an elite quarterback with a high pass attempt volume offense, because I think the defense will regress a little bit. You got a guy that can be top 2 on his team in targets, be top 2 on his team in touchdowns, a guy that is not playing in line very often either. He's mostly in the slot, mostly out on routes as well. And he showed some talent as a young player last year, and his target potential, his touchdown potential is all there. So yeah, it's risky because, unlike Kittle and Waller, we haven't seen him do it for multiple years. But I do think if I'm getting a round and a half discount, I would rather have Schultz in round 6 than I would Kittle in round 4.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, like the bull case here is he develops into, a Zach Ertz level player when Zach Ertz was in his prime on Philly. A lot of volume, not the greatest after the catch, but
I think the touchdown upside is a little underrated, which Ertz never really had to his game either.
I still like Schultz. He's still my tight end 6, but I would just rather spend up on Kittle because I do think his ceiling comparatively to a guy like Schultz, given his athletic ability, is miles, in my
Right.
opinion.
And the other difference, too, is that I have those breakout candidate wide receivers over Schultz, and sometimes you
That's
have to
fair.
draft Schultz over them in the draft, right? Like most of the time, Dalton Schultz will go off the board before Elijah Moore and Amon-Ra St. Brown types, whereas I actually have those guys ranked higher, but I don't have to draft them higher because I know I can get them in the later rounds. So sometimes I can play the ADP game, grab Schultz at the end of round 5, and one of those guys is there for me in round 6 or whatever.
Where do you currently have Schultz ranked? Because I have him at 75. I don't think it's too far off now.
Yeah, I have Dalton Schultz ranked in the mid 60s. I have him at 64. So
It's
a
not
guy
even
that
that
I
much of a
do
difference.
feel
Yeah.
comfortable taking in, the early part of the 6th round, late part of the 5th round type of area.
Okay, so like again, like that the only difference here is like the process because I only have him like 11 spots total lower.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, pretty much. So,
Okay.
dragging on too long here. Let's go on to round 6. We have another former Dallas Cowboy heading off the list, but you guys can see the round 6 ADP on the screen there. A couple guys that I think are a little bit mispriced in this area. We talked about Allen Robinson and Marquise Brown as being great values in this area yesterday. Who's a guy that you think is a little bit overvalued in this area?
Amari Cooper, wide receiver, Cleveland Browns, an offense that I do want to avoid specifically now with the recent news that Deshaun Watson is not only expected, but guaranteed to miss 11 weeks this season. And with Amari Cooper, point blank and simple, you're drafting a 27-year-old wide receiver that has been realistically vastly overrated in the minds of fantasy football for the past 5 years. I mean, you guys can see on the screen, but you actually tweeted this out, Corey, but with Amari Cooper, he always gets this label of how he's such an elite route runner. Well, again, he's never finished as a wide receiver one in points per game, never exceeded a 21% target share, despite being, as you said, the clear number one target in the past couple years for Dak and Derek Carr, which Dak, obviously a top 8 to 10 level quarterback at worst, argue with your mother, and Derek Carr being an above average starting quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders. So with Amari Cooper, he always gets that narrative like, oh, like, look at this highlight. He just broke this cornerback's ankles. Well, the problem with Amari Cooper is that with his play, he's just such a volatile player on a week-to-week, snap-to-snap basis. Again, he's always dealing with some lower body injuries, these ankle injuries, these Liz Frank injuries, that
plantar fasciitis.
plantar fascia. Like there's just always something going on with Amari Cooper in his lower body. Again, I'm not going to make the case that he's an injury prone player, but it has affected his play in terms of a consistent week-to-week basis. With Amari Cooper, his highs are absolutely high sometimes, but with Amari Cooper, you don't know when he's going to be on the sideline for 10 snaps, when he's going to, command consistent targets, because realistically, throughout his career, we have seen the same story. Now we're entering a situation in Cleveland where Deshaun Watson is missing the first 11 games of the season, and I'd make bets right now that Cleveland is not a top 20 passing offense, top 20 offense, especially in that stretch that Deshaun Watson is out. So realistically, with Kevin Stefanski, you're getting a low volume, low upside, 27-year-old wide receiver on a new team where, again, we're not even seeing guys like Elijah Moore, all these like young breakout candidates that are listed after him in home league formats. If you're in your home league and a guy like Rashad Bateman's going around the price of Amari Cooper, a guy like Elijah Moore's going around the price of Amari Cooper, we talked about Amon St. Brown last video, going around the price of Amari Cooper, why are you ever just going to dead your pick right there and take Amari Cooper over all of those young studly talents at the wide receiver position? We bank on upside. We draft for players that can not only beat their ADP, but absolutely smash it. I just don't see a ceiling range of outcome of Amari Cooper being a third-round pick in fantasy this time next year.
Right. And we know a couple threads that we've pulled up before of the boom rates of second year and third year wide receivers going in the mid rounds. They're much higher than guys that are in their seventh season, like Amari Cooper. And you guys can see, despite getting labeled as an elite route runner, he has never finished higher than like the 50th percentile against man zone or press coverage, according to Matt Harmon's reception perception, even despite being on the Cowboys and being on such a great offense and having, like, last year, we were all in on Amari Cooper having like a top 12 season, right? Me and you were both like, Lamb and Amari Cooper can both be top 12 wide receivers. Well, Amari Cooper disappointed mightily, disappointed in 2020, disappointed for most of 2019 before he got, moved over to the Cowboys and stuff. There's just not a lot to like about Amari Cooper in this new situation in a bad offense. So I'm with you. I'm taking those young guys 10 times out of 10 over Amari Cooper, and I'm going to let him slide, let my league mates draft him. Another guy that I'm probably going to let my league mates draft is TJ Hockenson, who at 84 overall is where I have him ranked, 64 ADP. I think he's kind of just riding off name value and high draft capital still, because I think he was easily my biggest breakout candidate at the tight end position last year. In our draft guide, I had him listed as my biggest league winner at the tight end position, and he was great the first two games. The first two games, tight end 3 and tight end 2 on the week, over 20 points per game. But after that, he was tight end 15 in points per game. His biggest benefactor last year was volume. And to be honest, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to command more targets than him. And I think he's going to command a lot more targets than him as well. And the Lions also added in, DJ Chark and Jameson Williams, who will be back at some point. They still have Swift out of the backfield. So I know I waxed poetic yesterday about how target competition isn't a concern for me with Amon-Ra St. Brown. But the reason and the difference between St. Brown having target competition and TJ Hockenson having target competition is that I think Amon-Ra is the one. So it doesn't matter as much for him. Versus with Hockenson, it does matter because I think Amon-Ra is going to out-target him, and I think Chark and all those guys kind of mix in as well. And the other part of this, too, is that I just prefer Dalton Schultz and Dallas Goedert in this range of the draft. I prefer Zach Ertz a little bit later, prefer Pat Freiermuth a little bit later, and even, way later, I prefer guys like Hunter Henry as well. So with TJ Hockenson, I think he's a good player. I think he might be solid from a fantasy perspective this year, but I think he's going to finish around where he's being drafted. He's being, drafted as like the tight end 7, tight end 8, tight end 9 off the board. I think that's about where he could finish, but I'm not excited about saying he could finish any higher than that realistically. And that's why I like Schultz, Goddard, and some of those other guys better, is because I think they can finish higher than where they're being drafted.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that with TJ Hockenson. You have him at 84. Actually, I have him at 90. Again, part of that mid-tier of tight end. But with TJ Hockenson, I mean, I agree with you. What is the upside case that we're buying into right now? we know how he is on an efficiency basis. And if he's not commanding that elite target share that we saw from him when he's been healthy in the past couple of years, especially with the presence of Amon St. Brown on the field, what are we doing here? I mean, we expect the Detroit Lions, as optimistic as I can be for them, we expect them to be what, a bottom 10-ish or so offense, right?
Yeah, I don't expect them to be a great offense.
So if we're not getting that elite ceiling of offense where, he could provide a Dallas Goedert role where he's not getting a ton of targets overall, but he's going to give you some big plays, he's going to give you some touchdowns. If we're not expecting that from TJ Hockenson, this is about as dead zoney of a tight end pick as you could possibly get.
Yeah, exactly. So we can move off of Hockenson. Last guy that we're going to talk about real quick, AJ Dillon. I've already kind of touched on the Packers a lot. You're going to hear me talk about them as an offense to avoid in tomorrow's video with Ian Hartitz, but I have him ranked as my 80th overall player, AJ Dillon. He's going off the board at 69th overall. And
Nice.
I think AJ Dillon is a great running back. So there's nothing against the player. I think he's going to be very efficient this year. But the reason I have him ranked lower is simply because I don't rank injury dependent upside cases, AKA like a handcuff, over guys that I can think that can get there without injury, right? We have guys in that area, Elijah Moore, Amon St. Brown, Rashad Bateman, even lower than those guys, Ayuk, Gabriel Davis, Tyler Lockett, Adam Thielen types. And I also do love the quarterbacks in this range of the draft. Joe Burrow, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, Matthew Stafford types there, with Trey Lance obviously being a part of that. And then at running back, if we're talking strictly which running backs I'd rather have than AJ Dillon, I'd rather have Pollard because I think he can get there without an injury. And I also think an injury to his running back ahead of him is more likely than an injury to Aaron Jones. And Ramondre Stevenson going right around that area too doesn't need an injury at all to surpass the running back ahead of him in the backfield. So I'm on board with AJ Dillon as a mid to low end RB2 type with a very huge upside case if anything were to happen to Aaron Jones. But he's just a round or so too expensive for me. I would rather get, a round and a half discount on Kareem Hunt. I would rather get 2 to 3 round discount on Alexander Madison, a couple other handcuffs in that area just to get that upside swing rather than take AJ Dillon in an area where I think is very rich with quarterbacks, tight ends too, as we talked about, and wide receivers.
Yeah, the thing with AJ Dillon is that round 6 just feels gross with where you're having to take him again. If he was like an 8th round pick, we would be smashing him all over the board because of the relative receiver value in that range. But the fact is, right now, you're taking AJ Dillon over Amon St. Brown, over Elijah Moore. I mean, I know I keep repeating the same wide receiver names, but it's just crazy how criminally low they are going in drafts. But you mentioned those two names. I mean, even a guy like, if we look a little bit later, like Kadarius Toney, like there's a lot of quality receiver talent going after where AJ Dillon is right now. So I would rather, again, as you mentioned, just smash a couple of those receivers in round 6, round 7, maybe even round 8, and then wrap back around round 9, round 10 with, Kareem Hunt, Ramondre Stevenson type. So it's not even me hating the player because I do think AJ Dillon, standalone value, should be, as much as I think the offense can be worse than it was last year, still going to be an above average offense. It's still going to have access to goal line opportunity, which oddly enough, AJ Dillon actually led the Packers in last year over Aaron Jones. But as we know, the receiver breakouts in this range are way too tasty to pass up for, again, barring injury, a limited ceiling running back with AJ Dillon.
Yeah, and he's ranked RB25 on this multi-site ADP. I have him
Fine with
ranked
that.
RB26. So at
Yeah.
running back, I think he's fine. The only guy I have ahead of him that he goes ahead of is Ramondre Stevenson. But for the most part, I think he's adequately ranked at the running back position. It's just the overall rank of quarterbacks, tight ends, and wide receivers going in that area.
I have him RB23, so I actually have him ahead of where he's ranked amongst the running backs, but I just don't think that there's only 29 receivers that should be taken ahead of him. Like if I'm looking at my receiver rankings right now, let's just sort that. I would, like, again, 29 receivers are being taken over him on multi-site ADP. I would stretch that to at least 35 or so names. Like Chris Godwin's the last one. Obviously, the injury concern is there, but I mean the Chris Godwin, Darnell Mooney, Devontae Smith, Brandon Ayuk type of area, I would still rather have over AJ Dillon. So again, I mentioned it with the tight ends, why I have the tight end or the middle tier of tight ends lower, but this is just more of a structural philosophical thing for me in the sense that I'd rather take the upside swing at wide receiver over Dillon in this range.
Yeah, and the two guys going directly behind him, I would at their other positions, but I would rather have them easily. Dak Prescott and Dallas Goedert over AJ Dillon. For me, I would do that in a heartbeat. So that is the end of the video. As always, if you guys enjoyed it, if you feel like you got some value, hit the like button. If you guys are just binge watching our videos because you're panicking for your fantasy draft, we will set up a playlist called like if you're panicking for your fantasy draft, check out these videos, and all of these videos will be in there. So happy binge watching to those of you guys that are doing that, getting some late round cramming in for your fantasy draft. We're happy to help you with that. If you guys have any questions for us, again, feel free to reach out to us. Patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange is how you can get guaranteed responses to us, and timely responses and all that kind of stuff as well. Make sure you guys are checking out Underdog Fantasy. They are the best place to get ready for your fantasy draft right now. They have a contest called Best Ball Mania 3, where $10 million in total prizes, $2 million to first place, just for doing fantasy drafts and getting ready for your home league. So you can deposit, $100 on there. Use promo code FSE at sign up and first deposit. You'll get 100% back on what you put in. So if you put in 100, you have 200 on the site to play with. That's 8 Best Ball Mania 3 drafts, 8 cracks at $2 million to first place. They're trying to push on us to fill that contest big time. We definitely want you guys to get your share of those big time prizes and get a lot of practice for your home leagues in the process as well.
And stay tuned for this Saturday. You guys should see this live on the Friday. Well, we will be in Buffalo on Saturday. We will be live with a ton of Underdog Fantasy drafts. So a lot of stream, a lot of fun. After we do stream that, we're going to be hopping live for our official Patreon redraft league. So you guys definitely don't want to miss out tomorrow when we're smashing through a ton of content, specifically with the Underdog stream happening as soon as we land in Buffalo.
Yeah, exactly. So with that being said, as always, peace out. Talk to you soon.